Greetings, Nephilim. It's Leviathan here, bringing you another Crusader build guide, and this time we're looking at the top of the top. Yes, indeed, we are talking about the Legacy of Nightmares Bombardment build for Greater Rifts. This build has by far been sweeping the boards in Season 5. It is all that you need if you want to climb to the top of the leaderboard. So let's go ahead and jump right into some gameplay, because it's actually important to understand exactly how this build operates in order to use it the most effectively. As you can see, I have some pre-recorded gameplay on screen for you right now, and I am in a Greater Rift 75, which is about the Greater Rift that I use to farm at this moment, just to get experience and level some gems up. And as you can see, the idea here is that you're going and concentrating on elites. There's a rotation in the build where it's driven by your Convention of Elements ring, and because Thorns is amplified by the physical element, that is the one that you're looking out for in your Convention of Elements rotation. So whenever it's down, whenever it's not present, you're kind of herding mobs together, you're looking for the next elite pack, you're moving on your horse, and you have high uptime on your horse because you have very high CDR in this build. So you should be able to move very quickly from pack to pack, and then when that physical portion of the Convention of Elements ring pops up, that's when you go to town, that's when you do work. You pop your shield glare, which is going to amplify your damage against the enemies that get blinded. You then go into your rotation of hitting the Iron Skin, Reflective Skin, your Akarat's Champion, which should be up, and the rune we use on that is Prophet, just for the damage, or just for the defense, of course. And then right after that, you cast your Bombardment. And so what happens is that you have your Bombardment amped up by the Shield Glare debuff to the enemies, by the Iron Skin, Reflective Skin buff for your Thorns damage, and then also by the damage output from Akarat's Champion. So when all your Bombardments come down, they do a ridiculous amount of damage. And on really easy difficulties, it takes one cast of that and you wipe the elites out. On the higher difficulties, you might be sticking around for 2 to 3 to 4 rotations, depending on the weapons and just where your gear is at as well. So as you can see, it's really just about clearing those elites out. As soon as the elites are down, we are skipping most of the white trash mobs unless it's good density and the physical portion of the COE is coming up. Then we'll go ahead and drop it on that stuff, but for the most part it's always looking for the next elites. And what's nice in this build as well, you'll see when we get into the gear, is that you can also get elites off of the pylons because you have equipped the Nemesis bracers, and those spawn elites from pylons and shrines. So it's a really effective way to farm up experience and levels on your gems in GRs, because obviously elites are going to give you the most progress, and if you can make elites on command with all of the pylons that come up, and you're guaranteed to get pylons in Greater Rifts, then you can see it all comes together very nicely. So now that you've seen some of the gameplay here, I'm going to go ahead and flip into the actual in-game and go ahead and show you all of the things you need to know, the skills, the gear, talk about Paragon, talk about what's in the cube, and talk about legendary gems. So first we'll start off with the skills. Like I mentioned, Shield Glare with Divine Verdict. Shield Glare is a very short cooldown skill that we have. It blinds enemies, and then the rune on here makes the enemies that are blinded take 20% more damage for 4 seconds. So you pretty much want to be using that on use. It also helps you with safety, because this build does tend to get a little squishier at the higher end of the GRs, and so being able to control the mobs and stop them from attacking you, which they will when they're blinded, is actually very, very important, very useful for just controlling the amount of damage that you have coming in at any one given moment. The next skill that we have up is Bombardment Barrel of Spikes, and this is our workhorse. This is the skill that we're using for damage in this build. It is the only skill that really does damage here. We do use the horse, as I'll mention coming up, to do a little bit of damage, but it's really Bombardment that is going to do the work for you. And so Barrel of Spikes is a new rune that was added in patch 2.4. It now lets your Bombardment deal 200% of your thorns, and that's each barrel. And you'll see that there's some synergy there because we use the Mortal Drama in the cube, which doubles your bombardments. So you're getting, instead of just the 5 barrels that the skill normally gives you, you're going up to 10 barrels. And it's on a 60-second cooldown, but we also do some things to bring that cooldown between CDR on gear and also using Lord Commander. Steed Charge, Spiked Barding. This is another skill that does some Thorns damage for us, like I mentioned. So when mobs get down to that very little bit of HP, you can potentially just use the horse, ride through them a little bit, and you'll actually kill them off. So it's kind of nice when you're waiting for the rotation, and maybe you'll be able to kill them before the rotation comes up again. But mainly it's our mobility skill. When you use a Swift Mount as one of your weapon options in this build, you actually pretty much have 100% uptime on the horse, so it allows you to move and speed farm through rifts very quickly. As you go up into higher grade rifts, the elites become harder to kill, so you might want to look at a Sunkeeper that is essentially the top tier weapon for damage output, but having a Swift Mount also helps a lot just for the mobility and ability to ride the horse as much as you want. Laws of Hope, Hopeful Cry is a very interesting law because previously we were using Law of Justice, and some people were going with Decaying Strength, Immovable Object, just for the tankiness. But Laws of Hope actually helps solve one of the biggest issues with this build, wherein we don't have great recovery. If you take damage, you don't really have a great way to recover because you don't hit anything, so you don't benefit from life on hit. You might have some life per second regen, but it's not going to do much for you if you're getting global or you're taking crazy amounts of damage. So Laws of Hope with Hopeful Cry actually helps you produce some health globes. And again, we have high CDR, so this comes off of cooldown pretty often. And when you activate it, it essentially makes an aura, an invisible aura around your Crusader that whenever that aura intersects with enemies, there's a 5% chance to spawn health globes. And even though it says 5%, it seems like it's a lot more than that. Like, it's almost guaranteed to spawn off of many mobs. So this helps you a lot with your sustainability throughout the rift, just making sure you're able to heal up along the way. Because again, there are some moments where you're going to take some decent damage and you need to be able to heal and recover. Iron Skin, Reflective Skin. This is our big amplification to our Bombardment. You want to hit this before Bombardment goes off because Bombardment snapshots. So if you don't have Iron Skin up before you cast Bombardment, then your Bombardment will not benefit. If you were to cast Bombardment first and then Iron Skin, you actually aren't getting any benefit from the amplified Thorns damage. So you can see Iron Skin gives us 50% damage reduction, which is very nice, very important. And then the secondary with Reflective Skin is that while active, your Thorns is increased by 300%, and that is a multiplier. So it makes your Thorns damage go through the roof. Very important for this build, of course. Last but not least, for the active skills, Akrat's Champion with Prophet. This gives us another cheat death, it gives us some extra armor, and it also gives us some damage amplification. So again, it's in that rotation, like I was mentioning, that you want to hit that Iron Skin, and then your Akrat's Champion, and then your Bombardment, and also make sure you have the Shield Glare debuff up, and that's how you're going to get the maximum damage output from all of your Bombardment barrels. For your passives, you're going with one-handers in this build. You want Fervor just for the CDR reduction. You don't attack, so the attack speed doesn't matter at all. Iron Maiden is an absolute must. It just multiplies your Thorns damage 50%. Lord Commander is a very important one here as well because it reduces the cooldown of both your Steed Charge and your Bombardment, and that's really important, especially for the Bombardment, so that you can always have between this passive and the CDR on gear, uptime on your Bombardment, so that every time that physical portion of Convention of Elements rolls around, you'll be able to cast that Bombardment. And then Finery is just an absolute beast. Because you'll be stacking up Paragon as you go, you need to have lots and lots of gems, and that means you'll have strength that's going through the roof. And when you augment your gear, you're putting strength on there as well. And so Finery kind of interplays with all of that to multiply your strength by quite a bit. And what it ends up doing is multiplying your Thorns damage, since the main stat also helps with that. So it's very important, very useful. Let's head over to the gear. So it's a Legacy of Nightmares build, which if you don't know, Legacy of Nightmares is dubbed the no set, which means that as long as you're not wearing any other set pieces besides the 2 rings, the Litany of the Undaunted and the Wailing Host, then you're going to get 100% increased damage dealt and 4% reduced damage taken for every piece that you're wearing that's ancient. So of course this means that this build has a lot of scaling in terms of preparing for it with your gear. It's going to take some time for you to get all these required pieces and to get them all ancient and to get them with the right rolls. But over time, over the course of a season, this is kind of the end game for Crusaders, so it is the build that you should be aiming towards. Just keep an eye out for these pieces. We'll start here at the top. We're going to look at our Burden of the Invoker. These are the shoulders that you can use. You can also use pretty much any shoulders in here, but Burden of the Invoker tends to work nicely because it rolls with guaranteed thorns on it, which helps a lot because you want thorns in all your secondaries if possible. So you want that, and then from there, strength, all res, cooldown reduction, and bombardment damage. There's also a case for area damage here as well. Area damage is really good in this build because it allows your barrels to just do more damage to a wider spread of enemies, and that's really good for better AoE. So that's what you want for your shoulders. For your helm, you want an Leoric's crown with strength, vit, all res, and a socket. And then if you can get a really nice percent on the legendary power, that's really good. Here I have 98%, so that's excellent. And on the secondary, of course, you would want thorns if you could get that for yourself. For your amulet, you want to go with a Hellfire amulet. You want to get one that has some sort of passive that works for you. Here you can see I have Indestructible, so that helps us achieve our cheat death in the build. And then this is pretty much ideal. You want physical damage amplification there, and strength and vit. And we have the vit because A, we need it for just boosting our life up, but also because we wear a Heart of Iron in the cube, and that helps to get our base thorns damage up. And then a socket in there so you can put your gem in, etc., etc. For the gloves, we're going St. Archu's Gauge, and this is a nice defensive piece because whenever you get into an elite fight, it'll give you a nice shield against those elites. This one is tough to itemize because obviously there are a lot of stats on gloves, and as we all know, Thorns does not crit, so you don't want crit hit chance or crit hit damage, which you can get on many pieces, so it's something to avoid. But your ideal gloves would probably have strength, vit, all res, cooldown reduction, and a secondary of thorns here. For your chest, you're going to go Aquila Cuirass, or potentially a Heart of Iron, whichever rolls best, but because the Heart of Iron has a range on its legendary ability, that matters quite a bit. You're likely going to be cubing the Heart of Iron and wearing the Aquila Cuirass. Aquila Cuirass is, of course, an old legendary that got a new power in 2.4, and it reduces the damage taken by 50% as long as you're above a certain threshold of primary resource, and because this build does not spend, you're always above that threshold, so this is great. The ideal Aquila Cuirass will roll with strength, all res, bombardment damage, and 3 sockets, and then you should be able to put thorns on your secondary as well. It's pretty tough to itemize for, so you can see here I just have strength, fit, all res, and some sockets. For your bracers, like I mentioned, the Nemesis bracers, this is ideal here. Physical skills deal 20% more damage. You want that roll on there, and strength, vit, all res. And then, of course, Call to Sun's Despair. Call to Sun's Despair on everything since all your pieces will be ancient, of course. And then secondary would be nice to have some thorns, but having some reduced damage from range attacks is not bad either. As we mentioned, the 2 rings, Litany of the Undaunted, and these also count, by the way, for that damage increase and damage reduction if they're ancient. So you want every piece to be ancient, including your 2 rings. The ideal statting here is probably going to be strength, vit, cooldown reduction, and then a socket. There's also a case to be made for strength, area damage, cooldown reduction, and a socket. But again, you do want to have a nice threshold of vit because you need life. You are a little bit vulnerable at times, so it can get very sketchy, especially if you're on hardcore. So having a nice baseline of vit, and again, vit does translate into some thorns damage for you. But area damage, like I mentioned, is so huge that it's not a bad idea to really spec for it. The Belt of the Trove, another staple, and this is just going to get you some more bombardments from its legendary power. Some of the theory crafting out there notes that the bombardments that come from the belt aren't as amplified as the ones that you cast yourself, so that's something to be aware of. But they do get increased damage from falling at the same time as your Convention of Elements physical portion, so there is something to be said for that. But they will not be as strong as the bombardments that you're casting, so that's something to note. But your ideal rolls here would be strength, vit, all res, and life percent. It would be nice if it just comes with that, and then you can reroll the secondary for thorns. And then the other ring, the Wailing Host. This one I have strength, area damage, cooldown reduction, and then a socket, and that's really nice. Here, of course, on both of these rings, it'd be nice to get some thorns secondaries too, but you'll definitely take what you can get for these rings. For the pants, it's going to be the Hexing Pants of Mr. Yan. These are the ones that will give you some amplified damage when you're moving. So because you're always on the horse essentially, or just able to move around quite a bit while the bombardments are being casted, or while the bombardments are falling from the sky, I should say, then you'll always have that damage amplification working for you. And we don't care about the other portion where we lose resource generation while we're standing still. So strength, vit, all res, sockets, and then the secondary of thorns. I have a really nice pair here. For the weapon, you can go swift mount, which I was mentioning is kind of like your speed farm one. It also works just in general for pushing too. Just gives you more uptime on the horse. Your ideal one would have strength, vit, cooldown reduction, and area damage, because you would roll off the base damage since that does not factor into your thorns output. And Ramalani's on there for the socket, and then socket with a topaz to get more thorns damage out of there as well. The DPS version, like I was mentioning before, would be a Sunkeeper, and on that your ideal rolls would be strength, damage against elites, area damage, cooldown reduction, Ramalani's for socket, topaz in that socket. So there are some options there. Like I mentioned, as you go up into the higher GRs, the elites take a little bit longer time to kill, so it's nice to get some elite damage into the build, and that's what a Sunkeeper's for. Your boots are going to be the illusory boots. These are nice because they allow you to just walk through enemies unhindered. You can go through Waller affix as well too, which is nice. Although there's a weird interaction where even though you have these boots on, if you're on your horse, you cannot pass through Waller. I'm really not sure why that is, but maybe that'll get fixed. I hope it gets fixed because it'd be nice to just continue being able to go through walls even when you're on your horse. But strength, vit, all res, movement speed, and then a secondary of thorns if you can afford it. These are really easy to get because they're bounty only items, so you can just farm them up in Act 2, and eventually you'll get an ancient pair, and they tend to itemize pretty nicely, so you should be able to get good ones there. And then your ideal shield is the Lidless Wall, and that's going to have physical skills, deal 20% more damage on there, just to boost up more of that physical again. Strength, vit, cooldown reduction. Here I have an absolutely horrid cooldown reduction roll, unfortunately. But that is pretty much the shield that you want for this build, and thorns as a secondary would also be nice. If you're a little more cautious, you can also go with a storm shield, which will give you some melee reduction, and you would want strength, vit, cooldown reduction, and maybe like a life, or there's probably other things you could find on there. You can get like elite damage, you can get elite defense, so things to consider. When you're in Greater Rifts and you're pushing, I highly recommend switching over to diamonds. A diamond in the helm as well, always for that CDR. But diamonds in your chest and your pants for the increased all res. If you're farming lower GRs, trying to speed farm, you can definitely go with the rubies. It boosts up your strength multiplier quite a bit. And then for your legendary gems, we're taking an esoteric alteration, just again to boost up that defensive portion. Bane of the Trapped for awesome offense, because it is the best offensive gem out there, and then a Boyarsky's Chip for extra thorns damage. In the cube, let's head over there, you are going to have the Mortal Drama, which, as I mentioned, doubles the number of the bombardment impacts, so you're going from 5 to 10 barrels. The Heart of Iron, as I mentioned previously, so you gain thorns equal to 300% of your vitality, so that's why Vit is important in the build as well, besides just helping you survive. And then the Convention of Elements, and that's going to boost up, that's the whole crux of the build, honestly. It works on Convention of Elements, so you're waiting for that rotation, physical comes around, throw down the bombardments with all of your buffs previous to that. In Paragon, it's really nice because you have movement speed on your boots, so you only need to spec into your movement speed the amount to get to 25%, so it's going to be 13% if you get a 12% roll, 14% if you have 11%, so on and so forth. And then the rest you can just honestly dump into strength. Just keep boosting up your multiplier, and it's gonna, like I mentioned, it's gonna synergize with Finery, so you're just gonna get a ton of strength out of that. Offense, none of these matter except for CDR, so you can actually be done as soon as you have 50 points for your offense tab. Just put it to CDR. Attack speed does not benefit us, crit hit chance doesn't, crit hit damage doesn't. For your defensive tab, you're gonna go all res, and then armor, and then potentially life regen, because we do, like I mentioned, need to be able to recover, and this build does not have the best recovery, so life regen will be nice. And then life percent, because you will have a lot of vit, so having life percent will boost up your overall life pool. And then utility, area damage is very important, like I mentioned, because it's going to allow your bombardments to just do more damage, spread that damage out really good. And the rest of these actually don't matter inside of greater rifts. If you're in regular rifts, then gold fine all the way. And that is the build, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like what you saw, definitely give me a little thumbs up. Feel free to hop into the comments and let me know how you're finding the build. Let me know if you are going to be crushing the leaderboards with this thing. If you enjoy it, what you would like to change, what you would fix, what you would potentially add into the build. And just continue to look for some videos as I go through the rest of my Season 5 journey. We're almost done here, and I'll be seeing you guys around. Take care.